Every Friday night was sacred. Not light a candle and hold hands sacred, but more like habitually sacred. A routine dipped in garlic butter and mild emotional detachment. For 6 years, Tyler played the domestic chef, roasting his signature rosemary chicken like he was on a cooking show called Desperate Husbands, while Candace picked a new show to half-watch and fully ignore. That night, while he plated dinner like it was being judged by the Queen herself, Candace was hunched over her phone, face lit by the screen, smiling to herself. Not the ha-ha, that meme is funny smile. No, this was the kind of smile that carried secrets. "What's funny?" Tyler asked, trying to sound casual as he set down her plate. She blinked, like she'd forgotten he was in the room. "Huh? Oh, nothing, just Amber." Of course, Amber, the walking caution sign, loud, impulsive, and always one girl's night away from a life crisis. "She's throwing a small party," Candace added, cutting her chicken like she was cutting short the conversation. "Well, her boyfriend is." "Where?" Tyler asked, already regretting it. "At Jackson's place." Tyler paused, fork in midair. "I'm sorry? Come again?" "It's just his house. His place is bigger," she mumbled, still not looking up. "Jackson," he repeated. "As in your ex-fiancé, Jackson?" She sighed. The kind of sigh women use when they're tired of your nonsense, even though you've barely scratched the surface of theirs. "Oh my God, Tyler, don't be dramatic. I'm going with Amber." Oh sure, that made it better. Nothing suspicious about a trip to an ex's house with a best friend who thought boundaries were a myth. "So let me get this straight. You weren't going to tell me until I asked?" She stood up, took her plate to the sink, and turned on the water like it was a curtain dropping on the conversation. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you. I'm going." Tyler stayed where he was, jaw locked, fingers pressed against his knees like they were holding him together. "Then hear me clearly," he said. "If you walk out that door tonight, don't bother walking back in." She turned to him, eyes narrowed, eyebrow arched with that same old attitude. "Are you threatening me?" "No," he said coolly. "Just setting a boundary. Something this relationship's been lacking for a while now." She gave him one of those sharp little laughs, not funny, not kind, just dismissive. Then she grabbed her purse and left. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Just walked out like she was headed to a brunch date with nostalgia. And Tyler? He sat there, with the warm food and the cold silence. He didn't rage, he didn't cry, he just knew. She hadn't left for a party. She'd already left him. The house was too quiet. Not peace and relaxation quiet. More like, your marriage just took a punch to the throat quiet. Tyler sat at the table, staring at his dinner like it was part of a crime scene. Somewhere out there, his wife was at her ex's house with Amber the enabler, pretending it was all just casual fun. Then came the first text, 8:34 p.m. "Just got here. It's super chill. Don't stress. Love you." Love you. Right. That phrase had officially been downgraded to a read receipt for betrayal. Then another, 8:45 p.m. "There's a bonfire. I'll text you later, okay?" A bonfire. Oh, perfect. Let's just pile on some nostalgia and burn what's left of trust under a starlit sky. Tyler stared at the phone. His fingers twitched. His heart was screaming, but his face, ice cold. He grabbed his jacket, stepped into his shoes, and left the house without locking the door. What for? The real thief had already taken what mattered. He drove through town like a man on a mission, no GPS, just fury and memory. He knew where Jackson lived. The place hadn't changed. Neither apparently had Candace's taste in bad decisions. He parked a few houses down and walked like he belonged. Shoulders back, jaw tight, heart pounding like war drums in his ears. Through the gate, into the backyard. Music, laughter, the crackle of fire, warm light spilling across smiling faces. And then he saw her. Candace, his wife. The same woman who'd rolled her eyes when he asked where she was going, now dressed like she was auditioning for a reboot of her past life. Standing with Jackson, laughing, drinking, and way, way too close. And just as Tyler stopped in his tracks, about to convince himself he was overthinking it, it happened. Jackson leaned in. Candace didn't flinch. Their lips met, just for a second. A short, careless kiss. Nothing movie-worthy, but it landed like a piano on Tyler's chest. He froze. The backyard blurred. The bonfire crackled like it was mocking him. He didn't confront, didn't yell, "I knew it," like in the movies. No one got punched. Instead, he turned, walked out the side gate, got in his car, and drove away, face blank, mind racing, and heart somewhere near his feet. But he didn't go home. Home? That was just a crime scene now, and the suspect was still out dancing with nostalgia. So instead, he drove to a place that smelled like bad decisions and cheap cologne, Murphy's, a dive bar that hadn't changed since the Bush administration. The lights were dim, the jukebox was playing something sad and twangy, and the bartender looked like he'd seen it all and was rooting for no one. Tyler sat down and said just 2 words, "Bourbon? Neat." The glass hit the bar with a satisfying clink. No questions asked. Exactly how he liked it tonight. And then he noticed her, at the far end of the bar. A woman. Not flashy, not desperate, just there. Hair tied back. Quiet confidence. She wasn't dressed to impress. She wasn't putting on a show. She looked like someone who'd also had a front row seat to someone else's betrayal. Their eyes met. She lifted her glass slightly, like a silent, "Cheers to being lied to." Tyler raised his in return. No words, just shared damage. "Rough night?" she asked, voice low, genuine. He smirked. "Let's just say, I crashed a party I wasn't invited to and saw exactly what I came to see." She nodded. "Oof, that bad?" "Bad enough to end a chapter," he said, swirling the bourbon. "Maybe a whole damn book." They didn't flirt. They didn't exchange life stories. They just sat. 2 strangers who understood each other without needing the details. Meanwhile, back at Jackson's house, Candace was probably toasting marshmallows and rewriting the definition of loyalty. Tyler took another sip and leaned back in his chair. He still wasn't okay, but for the first time all night, he wasn't pretending to be. "So," she said, swirling her glass, "was it a goodbye kind of kiss? Or a just one more for the road?" Jenna wasn't nosy. She was just accurate. Her voice wasn't full of pity, just a calm kind of understanding, like she'd seen enough wreckage to stop flinching at it. Tyler stared at the melting ring on his napkin. It was the kind of kiss that made it very clear who she still remembers loving. He didn't say Candace's name. He didn't need to. Jenna just nodded. They sat in that familiar silence, the kind you don't get with strangers unless the damage matches up. "She texted me afterward," he added after a minute. "Said she misses me." Jenna raised an eyebrow. "They always say that when it's safe to miss you. When they think you're still standing where they left you." Tyler huffed out something between a laugh and a sigh. "She doesn't even know I saw it. I didn't say a word. I just left." "Good," Jenna said. "She doesn't deserve your breakdown. Let her wonder how bad she messed up." He looked at her, surprised. "You really don't do the sugarcoating thing, huh?" She shrugged. "Not when it comes to betrayal. I think people deserve the truth, especially when it's ugly." That sat with him. Deep. True. Burned a little, like the bourbon. "I'm not even angry," he said eventually. "Just numb, like someone turned the volume down on my whole life." Jenna gave a slow nod, her eyes thoughtful. "That's grief. You're mourning something that's still technically alive." Tyler blinked. That one hit harder than expected. They kept talking. Nothing about jobs, hobbies, or favorite bands. Just raw, unfiltered damage control in human form. 2 strangers, unburdening quietly at the bar, like it was a confessional, and neither of them wanted absolution. Just someone who didn't need a long explanation. When he finally glanced at the time, it was almost 2 a.m. His phone sat face down, buzzing occasionally like a needy dog scratching at the door. He didn't touch it. Jenna slid her tab toward the bartender. "Well," she said, standing slowly, "thanks for not making this night worse." Tyler almost smiled. "Low bar, but I'll take it." She gave him one last look, steady, not lingering, and walked out into the night without asking for anything else. He sat there another few minutes, finishing his drink, not rushing. No epiphany, no swelling music, but something had shifted. Not forgiveness, not healing, just clarity. When he finally stood and walked out of that bar, Tyler didn't know what came next, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to pretend anymore. The house was dark when Tyler walked in. The kind of quiet that used to feel peaceful now just felt staged. He didn't bother turning on the lights, didn't tiptoe like a guilty man coming home late. He wasn't guilty, he was just tired, and, more importantly, done. He slept in the guest room again, on purpose this time, not out of spite, out of sanity. Morning arrived with the smell of coffee and what he assumed were passive-aggressive scrambled eggs. The kitchen clinked and clattered like a woman trying to reset the mood through breakfast. He stayed in bed longer than usual, listening. Not to be petty, to be sure. Sure that she was still pretending. Sure that he hadn't imagined that kiss. Sure that he didn't owe her a damn thing anymore. Eventually, he walked into the kitchen. There she was. Candace, in a sweatshirt she probably hoped looked soft and harmless, holding a spatula like it could shield her from consequences. A mug already poured for him sat on the counter like a trap. "Morning," she said too brightly. Tyler didn't reply. Just walked past her, picked up the mug, took a sip, and calmly set it down like he was evaluating a coffee brand he'd never buy again. "I made eggs," she added almost cheerfully. "Your favorite." He said noncommittal. "I lost my appetite somewhere around the moment you kissed your ex." She froze. That word again. Kiss. Still sharp, still true, still not up for debate. "You saw that?" "No," he said flatly. "I imagined it, in HD, from 6 feet away." Her face paled. The spatula drooped. "Tyler, He held up a hand. Don't say it didn't mean anything. Don't say it was a mistake. And for the love of whatever self-respect I still have left, do not say you were drunk." Her mouth opened, then closed again like a broken app. "I was going to tell you," she said softly. "No, you weren't," he replied. "You were going to bury it. And when that didn't work, you were going to serve me coffee and eggs like it never happened." Candace stared at the floor. "I didn't sleep with him. Did I ask that?" Tyler's voice didn't rise. It got quieter, more dangerous. "Do you think that's the bar? That if your clothes stayed on, we're still fine?" She looked up, finally angry. "So what now? You just walk away? Throw everything out because of one mistake?" He stepped closer, leaned in. "No, I'm walking away because I saw the truth. Not just last night, but in your face when you came home from that party like nothing happened, like I didn't matter, and honestly, that hurt more than the kiss." Silence filled the kitchen, heavy, final. Then he turned, walked to the guest room, and shut the door. And for the second time in 2 days, she realized he wasn't leaving to punish her. He was leaving because he'd finally remembered who he was without her. The days that followed weren't loud. They weren't dramatic. They were quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like a closing ceremony for a life someone else chose to burn down. Tyler didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He didn't sleep on it. He simply disconnected. He moved through the house like a ghost in his own home, not sulking, not bitter, just done. Like a man who finally realized that banging on a locked door doesn't make it open. It just bruises your hand. Candace, of course, went into emotional crisis control mode. She cooked dinner the next night, his favorite, lasagna, the kind of comfort food that used to mean something. She even lit a candle, as if ambiance could smother reality. He didn't touch it. She started wearing the perfume he once said reminded him of their first date. Left little things by his laptop. Snacks, coffee, a random sticky note that said, "I'm here if you want to talk." Oh, sweetie. He didn't want to talk. He wanted honesty. And that ship had already sunk. They passed each other in the hallway like co-workers in a building no one wanted to work at anymore. Polite, careful, distant. She tried jokes, light conversation, anything to poke a hole in the wall between them. But Tyler had mastered the art of polite apathy. "Want to watch something tonight?" she asked one evening, standing in the living room doorway in a hoodie 2 sizes too big and a guilt trip behind her eyes. "No," he said, not cruelly, just honestly. "I'm fine." She flinched, not because of the words, but because of how little they left her to hold on to. At night, he stayed in the guest room. She stopped knocking after the 3rd time he didn't respond. This wasn't a standoff. It wasn't even punishment. It was detachment. And Candace could feel it, growing, spreading, cementing. Until finally, Tyler made a phone call. Not to her, not to Amber, to Jenna. Yes, that Jenna. The woman at the bar who didn't lie, didn't pretend, didn't try to win him back with cinnamon rolls and selective memory. She answered on the 2nd ring. "You always call at night," she said, half amused. "It's the only time things are quiet enough to hear what I actually think." There was a pause. Then, "So, what do you think?" He looked around the dim guest room. The walls that used to mean home now felt more like waiting rooms for decisions that already made themselves. "I think I stopped loving the version of her she became," he said, "and I think I'm not supposed to feel bad about that." "You're not." And just like that, Tyler exhaled. It wasn't a laugh. It wasn't relief. But it was something. The silence in the house wasn't peace anymore. It was evidence, a quiet reminder that some things don't explode. They just rot slowly in place. Candace kept pretending they were in a rough patch, not a complete breakdown. She cooked. She folded laundry. She asked if he wanted to go for a walk, like that would undo what he'd seen. Tyler? He just existed, moved around like the ghost of a man who used to fight for this. He already knew about the kiss, had watched it himself from the shadows of that damn bonfire, and somehow that was survivable, not forgivable maybe, but containable, until today. His phone rang mid-afternoon. Justin, old friend, not close but not random either. Tyler answered with zero expectation, and got exactly what he didn't want. "Hey, man," Justin said, voice awkward. "I've been sitting on something and I feel like I need to tell you." Tyler's stomach went tight. "Okay." "I was at the party. After the bonfire, most people were heading out. I went inside to grab my jacket and I saw Candace and Jackson go upstairs." Tyler's voice stayed calm. "And?" "They went into the guest room. She looked around before they went in. And then the door, it closed. Locked." Tyler said nothing. "They were in there a while, man. I don't know what happened inside. But I know what it looked like. It wasn't nothing." Tyler closed his eyes for half a second. His jaw tightened. His heart didn't drop. It had already hit the floor days ago. "Thanks," he said simply and hung up. No panic, no yelling, just stillness, sharp, icy. She hadn't tripped, she hadn't slipped, she'd chosen, fully, willingly. Tyler stood, walked into his home office, pulled open the drawer. Inside, the manila folder the lawyer had given him, it had sat untouched, until now. He read it slowly, carefully, word by word, and then he picked up the phone and dialed the number on the first page. "Let's move forward," he said. "File it." That was it. No emotion, just execution. Later that day, Candace came home, juggling grocery bags and a half-hearted smile. "Hey," she called, "I grabbed that coffee creamer you like." Tyler didn't answer, just walked past her and set a stack of papers on the kitchen counter. She turned, saw the folder, froze. "What is that?" "You already know." She stepped closer. Tyler, you're not serious. He met her eyes, dead steady. You kissed him, I saw that, and I stayed. But then you went into a room with him, closed the door, locked it, laughed, stayed. Her mouth opened, but he cut her off before she even tried. That's not a mistake, that's a decision. And now, I'm making mine. She looked down at the papers like they were covered in blood. I didn't sleep with him, she whispered. I didn't say you did, he replied. But you left this marriage before your shoes even came off. She looked like she wanted to cry, wanted to scream, wanted to turn back time. But all she could do was stare at the papers and realize she'd run out of excuses. You don't want to talk about it? She said softly. I did, Tyler said. Before the locked door, before Justin had to call and tell me what you didn't have the guts to. She reached for his hand. He stepped back. You didn't just hurt me, he said. You insulted everything we built, and I'm done standing next to someone who treats loyalty like a suggestion. And then he left the room. She didn't follow, because for the first time, she knew it wouldn't work. The next morning, the suitcase was already by the door. Not hers, his. Neatly packed. No drama, no mess. Just a quiet decision zipped up in black nylon. Candace stood in the hallway, barefoot, watching him button his coat like she'd woken up from a bad dream and found it was still happening. You're really leaving? She asked, voice barely a whisper. Tyler looked at her, the same eyes that once lit up when she walked into the room, now just still. I already left, he said. You just didn't notice. She blinked fast, the kind of panic that hits when someone isn't bluffing anymore. Please, Tyler, we can fix this. No, Candace, he said calmly. You broke it. And then you lied about the pieces. She stepped closer. It didn't mean anything. Jackson, he doesn't matter. That's the worst part, Tyler said. You threw everything away for something that didn't even matter. Her eyes brimmed. She reached for him one more time. Too late, too slow, too familiar. This time, he didn't step back. He just didn't respond at all, because silence when it's final doesn't need volume. I still love you, she said, voice cracking. He looked at her with a strange kind of mercy. Not the kind that invites forgiveness, the kind you offer to someone who's already lost. I believe you, he said. But you stopped respecting me, and love without respect isn't love I want anymore. Candace stood there, arms limp at her sides, watching the man she thought would always be there walk out the front door with nothing but a suitcase and the dignity she thought he'd never reclaim. The door closed behind him. She didn't cry right away. She didn't scream. She just sat on the floor next to the couch, the one they bought together on a day that felt like forever. And for the first time since all of it began, Candace realized what had truly happened. Not that she'd been caught, not that she'd been left, that she'd been replaced by the man her husband had finally become. Tyler didn't reinvent himself. He didn't shave his head, move to Bali, or launch a podcast about healing through pain. He just lived, steady, quiet, free. He signed the divorce papers without ceremony, finalized everything cleanly, no theatrics. He found a small apartment, not fancy, not flashy, just his, with space that didn't echo betrayal. He still went to Murphy's once a week, not to drink away the past, but because, weirdly enough, that bar became a beginning. He saw Jenna again, a few times actually, sometimes for drinks, sometimes for silence. No promises, no pressure. Just two people who knew how to sit with someone else's brokenness without trying to glue it back together too fast. And for Tyler, that was enough. He didn't need fireworks. He needed peace. And every day, he got a little more of it. Candace, on the other hand, was still in the house, alone. She didn't cry every day, not anymore. But the silence, now that it was real, now that it meant something, haunted her in a way she didn't expect. She tried calling him once, blocked. She tried texting Amber. Got left on read. Even Jackson stopped responding after a while. Once it was clear she wasn't looking for him, just trying to avoid her own reflection. She looked through old photos some nights, read old messages, scrolled through a life she used to have, trying to pinpoint the exact moment she decided it wasn't enough. She never found it, but the worst part wasn't the regret. It was knowing that Tyler, the man who once would have done anything to fix it, had finally fixed himself. And that meant there was nothing left for her to return to. So yeah, in the end, she lost a good man for a moment of what if. And he gained something better than closure. He gained clarity,